Everyone. I wanted to do a video for you on informative speaking. Since the first speech that you are writing and presenting is one that asks you to present informatively. Sorry for the momentary brain fart. Okay, so informative speaking is the genre or mode of your very first speech. The introductory speech that you did for the top five is somewhat of an informative speech too. It's kind of a getting to know you activity and getting you used to recording and posting your videos to Blackboard. But the first speech that will be worth more significant points is your informative speech. And it is the most common type of speech that you will do in probably your professional or business world. And it is a way that you can teach your audience something. So when you are thinking about your informative speech topic, you want to consider that you are providing your audience with probably new information that they might not already know. And you could lead them to want to do more research on the topic that you're presenting. This is not the speech for you to try to change our opinions or get us to do something differently. However, that will be what your second speech focuses on. So this is a way for you to help people learn to shape how we see an issue. Again, not necessarily change our thoughts on it, but possibly give us a new perspective, show us what options we might have, and then enhance our ability to survive and evolve. I'm currently watching a season of Alone, the show where you are dropped off in the wilderness and have to try to survive with 10 items, and am learning things that I never ever want to put into practice. So you want to remember that your speeches, when you're speaking informatively, are objective, which means that you are not ladening them with bias or opinion. You are trying to present the information as fairly and neutrally as you possibly can. So try to think about what your audiences might already know about the topic. Depending on the topic you're choosing, the chances are that we don't know as much as you do about it. So consider this your way to teach us. You want to remove personal opinions and strong emotions from this speech and just present us with the information. Something that you want to think about in all speeches that you do is the rhetorical triangle. And this comes back to the idea of, am I a credible speaker? And that influences my ethos or credibility. And it's not just how credible I am, it's how credible my audience perceives me to be. The other component is logos, which is logic, information, reasoning. Does my information make sense? Does it flow well? Am I citing reputable sources? And then lastly, pathos or emotion. So for this particular speech, you're going to be a little lighter on the emotion than you will in your persuasive speech, but you might want to include some facts or figures, statistics, or stories that might elicit some emotions from your audience. What you can do to boost your credibility or your ethos is to tell us how you're related to the topic. So if I'm going to be talking, and I've chosen this in the past, how to pack lightly for an overseas trip or a long trip, I would talk about how I've traveled over the last 25, 30 years. And when I do take a trip that requires me to be on an airplane, I pack a backpack. That's all I bring. And I've had people ask me to teach them how to do that. So I would maybe talk about how my very first trip, I brought a really big bag. I was dragging it over cobblestone streets and it was just a pain. And how I've learned now that I want to downsize, I want to be efficient, I want to hop on and off of trains and buses without having to worry about my luggage. And then help your audience identify with you. So, you might think about how even if your audience hasn't traveled a lot of us often do like and enjoy travel, whether that's a local road trip or a bigger trip. And so just appealing to that part of your audience that connects with that. And then show you're telling the truth. Be honest, be genuine, and then use those good sources that we can trust. You are required to have at least 2 sources for this first speech, which means that you are doing research outside of your own experiences and beliefs. So you are going out and finding sources that help supplement that logos portion of the rhetorical triangle. When you do use sources, when you're publicly speaking, you have to tell us that you're using them. So, for instance, a travel writer that I've followed for decades now is called Rick Steves. He is a travel show host on public radio and public television, and he writes guidebooks. And I usually, when I'm going on a big trip, will buy one of his guidebooks. So, if I were to quote from him, I would say something like, according to Rick Steves, a well-known public television and radio author of travel books to Europe, says blah 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 blah. And then I would quote what he said or what information I found on his website or in his travel guide. So you always, when you're publicly speaking, want to tell your audience where you're getting your information. That helps to build your credibility with your audience, and it helps us to know, okay, if I look that up and I do my own research, do I find that this is a reputable, reliable source? And you want to do that whenever you use outside sources. So you will probably have at least two references in your first speech, since you're required to have two outside sources to the information that you're bringing in that is not your own experience. Make the topic meaningful to you first. That will encourage you to pick something that you're passionate about and that you're interested in writing and researching, and then tie it to your listener. We are all a little bit selfish when it comes to finding new information, and we want to know what's in it for us. So that acronym there, what's in it for me, help make that connection to your audience. Just because you're super interested in Legos doesn't mean that your audience will be, but maybe you can make them super interested in Legos, if not for themselves, for the little people in their lives, for just the innovation and the creativity that goes into it. So think about ways that you can connect to your audience. So a couple different types of informative speeches. Definitional, an example would be how to identify a sociopath or a narcissist. Descriptive, painting a picture with words, the characteristics, features, and functions of the Cooley region. I'm not originally from this area, so learning about the Driftless and how it came to be was really interesting when I first moved here. Explanatory, how the Cooley region was formed, or demonstration, how to use your college databases, how to create a fly for fly fishing. So think about maybe what your speech falls into. I'm not going to ask you to identify these, but just be aware of the different types of them. In order to develop informative speeches, you want to generate your audience's interest. That means in the very beginning of your speech, the first thing that is listed is the attention getter. So you want to grab our attention in some way, and that could be a story, it could be a series of questions, it could be a show of hands or audience participation in some way, but grab us from the beginning so you're pulling us in. And these are also some things to think about. You could use a little bit of humor. You have to be a little careful with humor because you don't necessarily know your audience too well yet. Contrast it to something that they already do know. Bring forward a really startling or intense piece of information. And then your coherence is created through the pattern of organization that you use. So in public speaking, we do a lot of repetition. In the intro, we tell our audience what's coming. We preview our main points. And then we use transitions to connect the main points. And then when we get to our conclusion, we review the main points. So it's a lot of preview, content, review. Part of the reason we do that is because we don't have the advantage in public speaking of seeing words. We are only relying on our ears, and our ears are not as reliable as seeing. So being able to hear the repetition, the reinforcement of those ideas helps your information stick with your audiences. So as I just said, preview, review, think about your gestures. You will probably only be seen from, shoulders and up in most of your videos. So think about your gestures. If you're sitting in a chair like I am that has the capability to sway, plant your feet firmly so that you're not swaying. Don't hold things that make noise like pins with clickers, and be aware of how often you're touching your hair, scratching your nose, fixing your glasses. All of those things can tend to be distracting. Use a positive attitude and a variation in your voice. One of the things that I see often in a public speaking course like this is people reading their speeches and using a monotone delivery, which is a great way to immediately kind of lose interest for your audience, because many of us don't want to be read to, especially if it sounds rather monotone. So whether you're anxious or bored or whatever, think about how you can fake it until you sound like you're invested and you're interested in it. That energy comes across in your voice and in your eyes and in your gestures, and it makes us want to sit up and listen more. You can have note cards in front of you, but I strongly discourage you from having your entire speech in front of you because you will be tempted to read it and then it will affect the way your voice sounds. Think about too, you're not required to have visuals for this first speech, but you certainly can. I am using Zoom to show my PowerPoint, so you see me in the little corner, but you see my visual aid taking up most of the screen. So you can certainly have visuals to help reinforce ideas. And I will post this to Blackboard so that you can see it and review it since I went over it. But I wanted to give you that brief synopsis on informative speaking. And I am asking you this week to submit your ideas for your first informative speech or your informative speech. And because we're in a 7-week format, I would encourage you to, once you pick a topic, to stick to it because we go really fast in a 7-week term, and spending too much time changing your mind and doing research on a topic that you set aside will lose you time. So just find a topic that you're immediately interested in, start doing your research, and remember we are delivering this one in week 3. So hope that helps, and I look forward to seeing your topic ideas. Take care, everybody.